My name's Wesley Littlefield with YourBassGuy.com. These 3 crankbaits we're about to talk about are guaranteed to catch you more fish during the spring, summer, and fall months. If you want to know all about how to catch bass with a crankbait, stay tuned. And honestly, crankbaits are one of my favorite ways to catch bass. I've said it before and I'll keep saying it. It's mainly because they're really relatively easy to use and the bass hit them and they fight. They've got a good hookup ratio, meaning that you don't miss a lot of fish. So that's one of the big reasons why I love crankbait fishing so much. Let's talk a little bit about where to throw a crankbait before we get into anything. The main place to throw a crankbait is going to be along rocky banks like riprap. I will throw them around stumps and some logs. If it's got a lot of branches sticking around it, I'm more than likely not going to throw a crankbait in there because treble hooks are notorious for getting hung up. So I'll throw it out along the edge of it, but I won't throw it into it like I would with a jig or a weedless soft plastic. I also don't throw them in the grass. I'll throw them along the edge of the grass or vegetation for the same reason. They get hung up, they lose all their action, or the bass can see, oh, clearly that fish does not look right, I'm not going to eat it. And so you don't get nearly as many bites when you're throwing it into the grass. If you can keep it up above it or out to the side of it, that's a different story. But in the grass, not any good. Let's move on to my favorite lure in the spring, and that is a crawdad color flat-sided crankbait. Similar to this one, they usually have rattles, just to give it another little sound that triggers the bass. But a flat-sided crankbait is the best thing to use in the springtime. I don't know what it, actually I do know what it is. It's because they have a tighter action, which means they don't wobble as much as you're reeling them back in, and they still deflect really well off of things, even though it's lipless. It doesn't have the big bill sticking off the front, and the bass just, they love them in the springtime, especially in the color red. Now obviously they come in all different colors. Like this one's a little bit more of like a shad kind of color, and I will actually use these trolling for sand bass during the summertime. For whatever reason, the sand bass like them in the summertime, and largemouth and smallmouth tend to prefer these in the springtime. As spring progresses and it starts to warm up a lot more, the water temperature starts to rise, I'll switch to a square bill crankbait. Sometimes it'll still be flat-sided, other times it won't, kind of like this one, how it has a rounded side. And it just, because it has a little bit more wider wobble, it looks like the fish is awakening to the warming waters, basically. But the square bill here helps deflect better off of bigger riprap, off of stumps, off of logs. Once again, not if they've got a lot of limbs sticking off of them. But it doesn't go very deep. So I'm going to stick with, really 6 foot is too deep for this specific one. Some you can get a little deeper diving and they'll go to 6, but generally I'm fishing in like 5 foot or less with this, and I'm trying to maintain bottom contact with those rocks and everything as much as possible. I'll also throw it in the early fall. Once summer has began to wind down and the temperatures are just starting to cool off and drop a little bit, fish move back shallow, and this thing can be killer in the early fall. I actually have caught some of my biggest fish in the early fall with a square bill crankbait. So don't overlook it in the late spring or the early fall. Of course, there's all kinds of variations, whether you've got different colors. This one's actually a jointed one, so it's got a little bit different action, and a little, each brand will dive a little bit differently, but overall, square bill crankbaits are designed for shallow water fishing. The final crankbait we've got today is the deep diving crankbait. It's easy to tell it's a deep diving crankbait because it's got a very long bill, and that's what causes it to dive deep. You will notice that sometimes they have the ring and the split ring here in different locations, and that'll actually determine how deep it dives as well. So sometimes just because it's got a long bill doesn't mean it dives as deep as you think it will. Usually on the package they'll tell you about how deep it dives, and if you have a depth finder then you can figure it out for yourself pretty well. But I really don't throw these from the shore. As a matter of fact, I don't think I've ever thrown them from the shore, because more than likely they're going to get hung up just because of how deep they do dive. Now, when we talk about deep diving, I'm saying like 12 foot or more. And usually it's about that 12 foot to 25 foot range. Most crankbaits aren't going to dive much deeper than 25 foot. And to get down to 25, you're going to need a really long cast and just literally, I mean, cranking it, spinning that reel as fast as you can to get it down to 25 feet. So I don't throw these from the shore. More than likely, you're going to be fishing with these from a boat, a kayak, if you've got a really good fishing kayak, and especially with a trolling motor and it's got spot lock. But these are excellent for knowing where the fish are and then targeting those specific fish and getting them fired up to feed. And it can literally be, you cast it out there and you get it down to the depth and you're cranking and you catch one, reel it in, cast it back out, you're cranking and catch another one, just back to back to back. And once again, it's got a really good hookup ratio because of the treble hooks. It's kind of the same concept of throwing it in places. You don't want to throw it in the weeds. You don't want to throw it where there's a lot of sticks to get hung up on, but rocky bottoms, it's a killer. There's multiple colors. There's a little bit multiple sizes. You can see here, if I can do it without hooking myself. These have a different bill length. They've got a different bill shape. That means that they'll run a little bit differently in the water. They'll run at a different depth. They've even got, I don't know if you, hopefully you can see that, where this one's got a little bit steeper angle, where this is a little bit flatter angle. And so that's going to determine how deep they dive. But all kinds of different colors. Generally, with colors in any crankbait, the idea is to stick to very natural or clear colors in clear water. So that's pretty easy to remember. And then bright colors like this chartreuse, some of these greens and stuff, in a little bit dingier and murky water. And like I said earlier, usually during the springtime, those reds work really well. And you can mix in red square bill crankbaits, but color is actually very important when it comes to a crankbait. And it might surprise a lot of people to hear that, but springtime, especially early springtime, it's reds. And then as I move throughout the year, usually late springtime, the rains are coming and turning up the water, so I'm switching to a little brighter colors. And then summer hits and the waters, sometimes they're clear, sometimes they're not, or depending on what lake I'm at, I move to the clear colors. And then of course, fall, I'm moving a little bit more to natural colors as the bass begin to feed up again. But if you guys are looking for another video on crankbaits, if they're your favorite like they're mine, then we've got a video down below. Right there, you can click on it and check it out. It's about how to tie it on and a little bit more in depth on how to fish it. And as always, remember that education is important, but fishing is essential.